From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Saudi Arabia is preparing to admit that journalist Jamal Khashoggi died during an interrogation. According to different media, Saudis might be preparing a report to acknowledge the journalist died during an interrogation that went wrong. Turkish police has searched the Saudi consulate looking for clues on Khashoggi's disappearance. Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State is heading to Saudi Arabia to meet with King Salman on the issue of Jamal Khashoggi. After a conversation with King Salman, President Donald Trump confirmed that he's sending Mike Pompeo immediately. Khashoggi was last seen walking into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul 2 weeks ago. He was never seen again.
Inside the consulate and ding.
Congress in Peru has closed the case to dismiss public prosecutor Pedro Chavarry. With 70 votes for and 9 against, Congress has rejected his dismissal. Earlier, social organizations demanded his removal in a protest. Demonstrators said now the investigations on Keiko Fujimori and others in power could be at risk. A group of over 1,500 migrants from Honduras is growing in size as they continue to walk north towards the United States. Their journey began on Saturday in the city of San Pedro Sula in the north of the country. A representative from the U.S. Embassy in Honduras expressed deep concern over the situation and said the people are being given false promises. Organizers said participants are not being promised anything, but are simply running away from poverty and violence.
There are no work opportunities here. One has to look for the best opportunities. I'm traveling with 4 children, and we're heading to the United States. Donald Trump has to receive us, just as we receive the Americans over here. They will have to accept us over there.
I feel well, thank God, because we are all united like brothers, helping one another and fighting for an objective we all have. We are all staying positive. I hope we are all positive, no negativity.
And as the migrant caravan continues to head north, the government of Guatemala announced it won't be allowed to cross the border. In an official press release, Guatemala's migration services say that the caravan is promoting unsafe and irregular migration, adding that the journey is endangering national security as well as the safety of underage migrants. The trial of those accused of murdering Honduran indigenous leader Berta Cáceres has been suspended again. The court still hasn't responded to the demands of her family. Our correspondent Gilda Silvestrucci with the latest from Tegucigalpa.
El proceso de juicio contra los asesinos de Berta Cáceres.
The lawyers argue that there has been arbitrary behavior in this case by both the Supreme Court and the public prosecutors. So we'll have to wait. But if this goes on too long, the period of preventative detention for the suspected killers could expire. They would then walk free without any hearing taking place.
Hundreds took the streets of Rio de Janeiro on Sunday to unite against fascism at a rally to honor the memory of Marielle Franco. The tribute was called in response to the destruction of a replica street sign with the councilwoman's name by 2 deputies from Jair Bolsonaro's far-right Social Liberal Party. Franco and her driver were shot dead in March as she returned from an event aimed at inspiring and empowering young black women. For many, she has become a symbol of the anti-Bolsonaro movement in the run-up to the presidential elections. As Jair Bolsonaro's campaigning efforts focus exclusively on social media, where grassroots work is non-existent, Fernando Haddad continues to meet people. On Sunday, Haddad met with disabled people in Sao Paulo. After listening to their concerns, he told them about the program of action to meet their needs. He also spoke about some public policies he implemented during his time as the Minister of Education under Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva.
We, through social assistance, through the Ministry of Education, signed a social assistance convention. We made an active call. We knocked on the door of every house and told them that it was compulsory to send their children to school and that it's free. After a few years, 400,000 children with disabilities were integrated in public schools.
Supporters of Brazilian far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro are claiming that alleged electoral fraud prevented him from winning the elections. They took to the streets of Sao Paulo demanding that paper ballots be used during the upcoming runoff election. According to them, the electronic voting system was tampered with. Bolsonaro won 46% of the vote in the first round of the elections on October 7th. The runoff is set for October 28 against Fernando Haddad of the Workers' Party. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has led the National Development Plan debate in Caracas. Maduro was accompanied by Vice President Delcy Rodriguez and several governors to discuss the economic plan. Rodriguez said the forum will enhance productive capabilities reflected on the economic agenda. On his part, Maduro stated that they will work for the development of the country, focusing on agriculture, industries, and pharmaceutical sector.
This is a perfect event because we have come here to celebrate our commitment with the most important task for our country, the main goal, which is the economic recovery, development, and prosperity of Venezuela.
According to WikiLeaks, the Ecuadorian government has partially lifted the communications ban on its founder, Julian Assange. Assange's phone and internet connection are being restored, and he will also be allowed to receive visitors. The government had cut his communications 7 months ago, alleging that Assange was interfering in Ecuador's foreign relations. He has been confined to the embassy in London for over 6 years. We'll take a short break now. More news in a minute. Welcome back. Ecuador's Confederation of Indigenous and Peasant Peoples continued their fight for land. Their members have protested under the National Agrarian Strike in capital Quito to the presidential palace, but were not allowed to approach the premises. Eventually, they were met with government officials who told them their concerns were being addressed.
If the government is concerned about promoting a policy of agrarian revolution, then it will require serious transformation that will entail the delivery of land, which means really saying no to the attempts to revoke the land.
Approximately 21 properties nationwide are at risk. Many are on the coast, but just as my colleague said, it was a tenacious fight. It was a battle which came paid for their lives. The biggest thing is that the current government does not know how much we suffered just to get the land, which is rightful ours. It's taken multiple strikes and other efforts, but thank God it was a cheat. Now, this current government wants to reverse this. It does not make sense.
Farmers in Mexico have mobilized to demand the agreements reached with the government come into effect. Demonstrators from all over the country arrived to the Ministry of Finance to reject the lack of resources. Leaders have assured that the agriculture production of next year is in danger by the lack of government support. Our correspondent in Mexico City, Pablo Perez, has the details.
Social movements and campesine organizations from 15 states are outside the Ministry of Finance. They were organized under the movement called Land for Everyone, demanding the fulfillment of the agreements made with the outgoing president Enrique Peña Nieto. They said they received some economic resources at the beginning of the year. However, after a couple of months, they stopped receiving help from the government and ran out of resources. There are about 2,800 social and health programs that are currently suspended due to the lack of public funds. These programs were aimed at helping the campesino communities across the nation. Several campesino leaders said that next year's crops are at stake, jeopardizing Mexico's food production. They will continue demonstrating until the government fulfills fulfill their demands.
700 campesinos in Colombia have protested to demand their right to life and peace. They ask for guarantees due to the latest murders in the region, adding that people have been dragged out of their homes and killed. A public prosecutor from Ocaña claims that clashes between the ELN and the EPL have unleashed a new wave of violence. The National Women's Summit in Argentina has come to an end. During the closing ceremony, it was announced that starting in 2019, the summit will be called the Plurinational Women's Summit. This as a way to be more inclusive towards participants from indigenous communities. Over the past 3 days, 73 workshops and countless other activities were held in the province of Chubut in defense of women's rights. But 10 women were arrested on Sunday night, while a number of others were wounded by rubber bullets. Police were seen dragging participants and forcing them into police cars. The organizers of the summit held the local government responsible for not protecting them from violence. Earlier, my colleague Soini Gray spoke to Lisa Bull, who was at the summit in Trelew. Let's hear what she had to say.
First of all, denounced that they tried to dampen our strength and our, we call it a feminist tide, our strength as feminist movement. It was a really big march, over 3 kilometers of women and dissident identities. We are more than 50,000 people there in this march, and at the end of the march, police arrested some women. They were maltreating them. We know it. It were like about 10 women which were arrested by the police, and because of our fast reaction and demonstration and the police office, they let them free some hours later, but we know that there will be investigations because of some charges they made them. It was a pacific and really nice march.
Our correspondent in Argentina, Sabrina Roth, brings us more from the summit.
Earlier today, it was decided that the Women's National Summit of 2019 will be hosted in the city of La Plata. This in the midst of the repression this year's summit saw. On Sunday night, police repressed participants and 10 were detained with another 5 injured with gas and rubber bullets. Organizers held Governor Mariano Acquirioni and the Security Minister of Province accountable. They also said the government didn't comply with what was agreed upon in terms of security. Women on Saturday night were hit with stones, and on Sunday the same thing happened. When people called the police answered that they didn't have a car to go there, and if they needed protection, they should have paid extra for it. This is something unheard of when the police are the one responsible to keep these women safe. The demonstration was for the legalization of a free, legal and safe abortion, a very important debate here in Argentina. It was finally rejected by Senate, but the struggle continues on the streets until abortion is legal. There are also complaints about meddling by the church in public policies about sex education, something that was legally approved, but it is not applied in all the provinces.
That was Sabrina Roth from Argentina. 9 out of 10 Mexicans believe their country is violent for women. According to a survey published by the Center for Public Opinion, 23% of Mexicans think women suffer violence because they allow it. Another 20% thinks violence against women is due to hypermasculinity, and 18% think it's influenced by values and education. 671 women have been killed in 2017 alone, according to the public institutions in the country. El Salvador is still celebrating its first saint, after Pope Francis canonized the late Salvadoran Archbishop Oscar Romero. Thousands of Salvadorans witnessed the ceremony, which took place in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican City.
Thousands filled the Metropolitan Cathedral in San Salvador to see firsthand Oscar Romero's elevation to sainthood by Pope Francis. Romero, who had often denounced repression and poverty, was gunned down on March 24, 1980, in his own church.
We are encouraged by our faith to take on a new path and take Monsignor Romero as an example of strength to face anything that comes our way. He showed us how to be brave, to be courageous indeed.
Worshippers also took part in a pilgrimage through the city's streets, in remembrance of Romero's fight for justice and for the poor, and how he stood up to the powers that be in the 1970s.
He stood up against the oligarchy and the powerful groups in the country. I don't think recognizing Monsignor Romero as a saint opens up wounds of the past. On the contrary, I think he needs to be recognized as the saint of the people.
And just before the canonization in Vatican City, a mass was offered to commemorate Monsignor Romero.
He was killed while he was holding a mass. He received death threats before he was murdered. Death squads placed the bomb under the altar of the Church of Sagrado Corazon. Those in power didn't like him at all.
The canonization of Monsignor Oscar Romero brings hope to the people, but now they are demanding the authorities prosecute those responsible for his murder.
The Caribbean community is confronting climate change from the perspective of its devastating effect on the small islands. Speaking on behalf of CARICOM at the UN Committee on Climate Change, Ambassador Elizabeth Thompson lamented the state of things.
As the Prime Minister of Barbados spoke in the General Assembly, that island, my island, was underwater, in some cases chest high. And I'm not talking about the chests of people short like myself. 2 weeks ago, there was an earthquake off the shores of Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Dominica. And just last week, Haiti experienced yet another devastating earthquake when its citizens were still trying to recover from the destructive and traumatic earthquake of 2010. We contribute the least to climate change, but we are simultaneously the most at risk from its negative effects and the least equipped to withstand and adapt to the social, environmental, and economic impacts of climate change.
After the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change made their latest report public, many were shocked by the findings. The report states that if governments want to achieve less than 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming, we need to stop using fossil fuels immediately. Based on current usage, we are on the track for an increase of more than 3 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. The heart of the Dominican Republic diaspora in the U.S. lies in New York City, and that's exactly where the 11th annual Dominican Book Fair recently got underway.
Organized around the theme Reading Opens Horizons, this year the festival is dedicated to the late Dominican intellectual, historian, and former president, Juan Bosch.
This fair has more than 100 free events for Dominican people. There are about 1 million Dominicans here in New York. A lot of people came here from different countries far away, like Spain, for example.
This event pays tribute to one of the most relevant individuals in Dominican history and literature, the professor Juan Bosch.
We share books from here, and at the same time we can know our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. We can see not only the fruits of their labor, but the conditions they sometimes work under. We share a common identity, and this is an unifying experience for all Dominicans in the diaspora.
It's not just books. There are lectures, cinema, theater, and children's literature. They are all a part of the cultural exhibition.
Dominican people have strong presence in the United States. So, this is a sort of cultural meeting point for us.
More than 80 authors, scholars, and literary giants have taken part in this cultural event.
They are giving us courage and the opportunity to show the world. What we feel and write, what we put on the books, is what we feel.
Paintings, drawings, and photography were on exhibit. They are the works of talented Dominican visual artists living in the U.S. They closed a chapter on this cultural event showcasing the talent of the Dominican diaspora in New York.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. The Islamic State in Nigeria has allegedly executed an aid worker who was kidnapped last March. According to local media, the Red Cross nurse was shot dead after a deadline imposed by the armed group expired. The 24-year-old was kidnapped with 2 other medical workers. One of them was a midwife that was executed last September. The Red Cross is waiting for a final report to confirm the news. The number of Yemenis on the brink of famine could rise to 12 million due to escalating war and deepening economic crisis. The United Nations said it feared millions struggling to make ends meet will succumb to severe hunger and disease. Saudi Arabia and its allies imposed a blockade on the country for several weeks, as Yemen imports 90% of its food. The UN is scaling up its emergency food and nutrition aid to reach those affected every month. Our correspondent in Egypt, Hisham Wanous, has the latest.
Yemen is experiencing one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in the world. According to the United Nations, the country is on the brink of the worst famine in 100 years. The situation has been escalating since Saudi Arabia and the UAE started their bombardment in 2015 in support of President Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi against Houthi fighters who have taken over vast swaths of the country. The conflict has killed around 2,200 children and endangered 5 million children who face starvation. The bombing has devastated civilians and infrastructure. There is a blockade on the main port of Hodeidah, which was crucial for the import of food, commercial and humanitarian goods. The situation has also caused a serious health crisis with the rise in epidemics such as cholera. Yemen suffers from a lack of medicine, doctors and hospitals. The United Nations says that they have lost a war against starvation because they can't carry out humanitarian work due to the lack of security. And as of now, there's no end in sight as prices soar and the bombing continues.
Palestinians and activists clashed with Israeli forces in the village of Kalmarav as residents fear a demolition of the village. At least 4 people were detained and 1 Palestinian remains in custody. Israeli forces are expected to remove more than 200 Palestinian residents from the area. Now let's take a look at some other stories making headlines from around the world.
France is prepared to help in North Korea's denuclearization efforts on the condition that it proves its commitment to the process. The announcement comes as South Korea's President Moon Jae-in is meeting his counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, in Paris. Although France is not directly involved in talks between the United States and the Koreas, its nuclear know-how could help prevent escalation.
As a state with a nuclear arsenal, France is ready to contribute its cooperation on a technical level to that process. We have an operational, technical and scientific expertise in the nuclear field, which, in terms of denuclearization, would certainly be useful, and which we would offer up if that's seen pertinent.
Hundreds of Moroccans have marched through the streets of Casablanca protesting against widespread corruption. Trade unions, political parties and non-governmental organisations participated. According to the Transparency International and the Business Anti-Corruption Portal, Morocco has a culture of corruption enabled by nepotism and bribery. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni just added a pair of Yeezy trainers to his wardrobe. He was gifted them personally by Kanye West and wife Kim Kardashian on a visit to the country. In addition to the gift from West's own fashion line, they discussed the promotion of tourism and arts. Museveni said on Twitter that they had fruitful discussions.
We come to the end of this news brief. This and many other stories you can find at our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.